Good morning. The training that I'm going to speak with you about today is called VESA. It's the Victims Economic Safety and Security Act, which is a direct policy in Illinois, but it's also enacted in 20 states across the country with varying information in each state. I'm going to train on Illinois just because that's what I'm most familiar with, and I hope to use this actual training and get into some businesses that have still not understood the process. Prior to the training is divided into three sections. One is the prior to the training, second is the actual training, and third is the follow-up. Prior to the training, Human Resources need to develop a workplace policy on domestic violence and the appropriate VESA forms that will need to be completed immediately when the employee requests leave. If the employee notifies the supervisor over the telephone or remotely, the supervisor needs to get the needed information on the call and complete the form. After the employee returns, the form needs to be completed and needs to be placed in the employee's file in Human Resources. VESA posters need to be placed in around each time clock or in other public settings in the workplace where the employee minimum wage and safety standards posters are posted also. After completion of the training, all supervisors will inform their employees of this policy during their next scheduled team meeting. And in the future, all new hires will be informed of this training in orientation or whenever at each team meetings. So the learning objectives are of this policy are the department supervisors will be able to identify what is a protective individual. They will gain understanding of how domestic violence may impact the workplace. They will recognize the victims of domestic violence and sexual assault rights in the workplace and in the state of Illinois. They will understand the provisions that VESA and the impact it may have on the scheduling of their departments. And while documentation is what documentation is required from the employee to share with their supervisor and our workplace. It will start with a classroom activity to get people on board with the seriousness of domestic violence. Before we start all this, though, it is important to recognize that the intended audience will be all HR personnel and department supervisors. That being said, we need to make sure we open the training with an acknowledgement that there may be survivors or family members of domestic violence, sexual assault present in the audience. If the topic is troublesome for any participant, they need to please feel free to excuse themselves and inform your supervisor of the problem. No specifics will need to be given out, but you will have to complete this training individually with Human Resources. At the beginning, trainees will be instructed to break up into groups of 2 people, one person agreeing to be the role of the victim and the other the role of the supervisor. If there's an odd number of people in the room, one person will just be assigned to a group where they will just observe the group with no interaction. After the scenario is read by the project leader, there will be questions that will be given out to each group, and at that point they need to go through the questions and answers, taking notes, because when we come back together we will go over the different findings from people. This activity is scheduled to last about 15 minutes. The training will have introduction. It is important that everybody in the room get to know each other, so every person will be asked what their name is, what department they're in, and how long they've worked with the company. Statistics on prevalence of domestic violence in general. It's estimated that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be victimized in a relationship at some point in their life, and that an incident of domestic violence occurs every 9 seconds in the United States. Impact on the workplace is pretty impactful. It's estimated that the financial costs of domestic violence and sexual assault are upwards of $8 billion a year in lost work productivity and health care costs. The person being victimized at home is oftentimes so also at their workplace. Examples of ways that the workplace can be affected include stalking, obsessive calling and texting, increased absences due to injury, and isolative tactics of the employer. 50% of women killed at work are so by a partner or an ex-partner. As I said earlier, 20 states currently have similar laws protecting victims, and this is believed to promote safety not only to the victim but to the workplace. Specifically in Illinois, the VESA components are that the Illinois law has been on the books since 2003. Businesses with over 50 employees are mandated to comply with this policy. It pertains to employees or those having family or household members that are a victim of domestic violence and or sexual assault. They're eligible for up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave in a calendar year. That time can be consecutive, or it can periodic. It can be taking just an hour at a time based on their needs. They may be required to provide information of the situation. At this company, we are going to require some type of documentation. That documentation may be provided as a police report, a court order such as an order of protection, a physician's notes, or a domestic violence or sexual assault agency letter. Requests must be made 48 hours ahead of the leave, unless doing so puts the employee at greater risk of harm or is not practical. An example would be if there was an altercation at their house last night and they chose to go to shelter, they would not have been able to let you know about that 48 hours in advance. Leave time can be used for time in shelter, counseling, going to court, psychological trauma support, medical care, relocating, and other victim service provisions. The employer can't, to any eligible employee, reduce their time scheduled when they return to work. They cannot be terminated, and you cannot discriminate with them on any other manner. Employees can take time as unpaid leave, but are able to use vacation, sick, or personal time if desired and if the time is available on their books. Employees need to maintain group health insurance. The employer needs to maintain the employee's group health insurance if it was active at the time of the request. Posters need to be displayed by the time clock or in other common employee areas. Information about the act and process needs to be part of every employee's hire packet and mentioned in new hire orientations. If there is a complaint about how a company is dealing with VESA, they can contact the Illinois Department of Labor at the Michael A. Billidick Building. It's 160 North LaSalle Street, Suite C, 1300, Chicago, Illinois, 60601. Their phone number is 312-793-6797. After training is completed, there will be a short question and answer period, but long-term follow-up is insurers will need to ensure that the appropriate displaying posters are visible at their work sites at least monthly. They need to go do a walkthrough and see that. Employers will notify Human Resources immediately when an employee requests leave under VESA. Metrics will be maintained on the number of employees that have received training, plus the number of training hours. Numbers will also be kept on the number of employees that have taken off time due to the act and how many hours, days, weeks of time were taken. References for this training were created from Futures Without Violence, which is at www.endabuse.org. The Annals of Epidemiology, which published an article on April 1st, 2016, of the workplace homicides among U.S. women, the role of intimate partner violence, and the Victims Economic Safety and Security Act that was available on www.illinois.gov.